Welcome, friends. To begin, I would like to offer a few acknowledgments. First off, my gratitude for the use of this space from the White Heron Sangha allows us to practice here, and it's really been a real big part of my practice. I began Crow's End, like many of us did, and this was a new space, and it really has become a second home, so to speak. So I very much appreciate their generosity of spirit. And as is also our custom, is to acknowledge the Northern Chumash who lived on these lands. And according to some of the calculations that can be mistaken, they lived here and are here for 50 times longer than since the short while of time that us Europeans, or my descendants, have been here, moving up the Central Coast from Southern California. Boy, that is just a drop in the bucket. It is hard to fathom the length of time they were here, and I was thinking of it compared to the Buddhist teaching. Again, just a fraction of the time that they have been practicing on this land. Really rich. Anyway, my gratitude to them, and then to also my gratitude to Roshi Shogun and my teacher Roshi Shogun, and his teacher Roshi Nikāya. I practiced with a little bit, and it's been a real positive experience working with both of them, and I'd have to say all the teachers that I've practiced with through CCLA. And for that matter, my gratitude and acknowledgement for all beings who practiced the Buddha way since the Buddha, all the way back to and including the Buddha. We all show up here for our own causes and conditions that brought me here, that brought you here, brought you on Zoom here, on those watching the recording. The causes and conditions that brought me to this moment bear acknowledging, in my opinion. So, my intention for this talk, and that's why the study of this talk has been really rich for me and challenging. But intention came up. My intention here today is to offer some Dharma and how it's come through me, my experience. And I invite you to consider your own intention, what you bring to this experience. And with that, away we go. So, in looking for a topic for this talk, I reached out to a few people and got a little bit of ideas, and then I was at the cabin reading a book, and I ran across, I was reading, so you can't say I stumbled on it, but there is one thing that when cultivated and regularly practiced leads to deep spiritual intention, to peace, to mindfulness and clear comprehension, to vision and knowledge, to a happy life here and now, and to the culmination of wisdom and awakening. And what is that one thing? It is mindfulness centered on the body. That is a quote from the Buddha, and it was in a book called Your Body is Your Brain, which I highly recommend. One of my friends here today has looked into that book. And actually, I didn't particularly buy that quote right off. It sounded like something from the internet quote collections because it was so understandable and relatable to me, as opposed to being written 2,500 years ago. Anyway, in fact, when I did a little looking into it, it is from the Anguttara Nikāya discourses, I believe that's what they would call it, and which is a very interesting, again, from the Pāli Canon, the older writings on the Buddha, and the Anguttara Nikāya. It is a series of collections based on numerical concepts. In this case, it is the book of fours. So there's a book of threes, a book of twos. And so there are considerations grouped in these short numbers, which is an interesting way to practice, right? Buddhism has this methodology that is not necessarily something that is native to my personality, but it's a thing. And that, matter of fact, that's the other intention I have. Sharing these bits that I'm going to talk about, I invite you to, if you're interested, look into these writings, back to the Pāli Canon in Theravada Buddhism. As Zen practitioners, we are the Mahayana style, or sect, or the great vehicle, whatever you want to call it. And there is a difference. There's a distinct difference in the practice. In that book, right? So, as is the case a lot for me, I come to Buddhism with a wide-ranging interests. Basically, I'm an omnivore, and I'm an omnivore of practices and information. So I'll take whatever I can get, wherever I can get it. And let's see. In that book, Your Body is Your Brain by Amanda Blake, there's quite a subtitle that I won't even go into. It's quite long. Matter of fact, just to divert the title of this talk, Mindfulness Centered on the Body, or How I Am Learning to Stop Worrying and Love my practice, something like that. Hope you all get the reference. And it's not just Dr. Strangelove, it's also the Bull Lincoln Rocky Show, which that's as much of an influence as anything. But in that, she has a quote, Amanda Blake: "Your body is the seat of a powerful intelligence that helps you navigate your most important experiences and relationships. In a very real sense, your body is your social and emotional sense organ. It is the lens through which you perceive your relational world and the instrument by which you act in it." That is a very interesting, her book, Somatic Awareness, terms I ran across like psycho-physiological coherence. These are strange things. These are the new school. This is not from the Pāli Canon. These words are not from the Pāli Canon. But they're very real to me, to my experience. And so we're bouncing back and forth, right? This is modern, my modern. And it's important because that's what captured my interest. When I saw it, I was like, boy, that's it. That's the topic for my talk. And sure enough, I look into it, a little bit more research, and we go back to the Pāli Canon for to a little bit about this, what is referred the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta. Again, one of the original Pāli Canon suttas, and in it the language is completely different. As a matter of fact, I have a copy of it, and I'm not going to sit and read it. You can easily access it, but there's a lot of features about it. What it does is, Buddha's emphasis in this sutta is on the direct path to awakening. The four foundations, Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the four foundations: mindfulness of the body, feeling, mind, and mind objects. And actually, I'll read the beginning of it. I think because it really is kind of very similar to what was in the Anguttara Nikāya. It begins, thus have I heard. And typical beginning in that respect. At one time, the Blessed One was living among the Kurus at Kamasa Dhamma, a market town of the Kuru people. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhu thus, "Monks," and they replied, "Venerable Sir." The Blessed One spoke as follows: "This is the only way, monks, for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of nibbana, namely the four foundations of mindfulness." What are the four? And then he proceeds talking about contemplating the body in the body. Contemplating, well, ardently, uses certain adjectives. So contemplating the body in the body, ardently. So that is what one of the sources I used for this was a series of talks from Joseph Goldstein, a really great teacher that I really like a lot from the Theravada tradition. And so the other thing with the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, said it a million times now, I can't say it, is there's various translations, and so I found that to be fairly confusing. I'm not a natural scholar. I was just talking with my friends on the way in today, and having too many things, do I have everything I need? Oh, well, if I have everything I need, how do I carry everything I need? And I can't. Like for this talk, I've got things scattered all around my house and my den. It's like, where's that one notebook I had? It had I thought I wrote something. Well, I finally found it last night, and it was interesting to revisit that. But that is an experience of mine that's very consistent. Being disorganized. Disorganized, I guess you could say. So one of the things about these sutras is they do have a methodical progression. So to give you a flavor for it, herein, in this teaching, a monk lives contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating feelings in feelings, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating consciousness in consciousness, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. He lives contemplating mental objects in mental objects, ardent, clearly comprehending and mindful, having overcome in this world covetousness and grief. The next part, which I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he talks about, and how does one do this, the practice. He begins, and it is very simple. That one is straightforward. Go into the forest, sit beneath a tree, or go to an empty hut, a quiet place, sit cross-legged and upright. I think that's about it. As clear as you can be. And when I read that old sutra, man, my brain starts going through those lists of like, do this, and repetition, and it wants to go run outside and play or something. I don't know what my mind, or go get a cup of tea, or something, right? And so it's kind of challenging for me to read these until it's like I recognize something. And what I'm recognizing is something that comes from some other stuff, modern science, if you will. The idea of, and Amanda Blake touches on it in her book, humans are constantly looking for a few things. The first thing is safety, just to be safe. You go out in the forest, you find a tree. He doesn't say it, but I'm thinking you put your back to the tree, right? You find an empty hut where you can see if something's coming in. I mean, maybe I sound paranoid, but I don't think so. Another person, Dr. Stephen Porges, he works with, he came up with a Polyvagal theory. And it's very interesting, fascinating stuff. I highly recommend his work. And I've listened listened to his stuff for quite many years, and basically it comes down to you have to feel safe before you can attach. Back to Amanda Blake's kind of three things. I believe it's safety, connection, and it was an interesting third one was respect or social position, which is kind of like my reputation or something. Well, with that other work, I found that an imbalance in the power dynamic between two humans creates tension. And where there's tension, in my experience, it impedes the flow, right? The flow of information in, the flow of information out. That's very general, right? These are my experiences. But from my experience of how to apply the Dharma, it's very important for me to find my own way to recognize it. And as a matter of fact, I invite you not only to see if you can recognize anything I'm talking about, but then also recognize when you don't agree with what I'm saying. And you want to push back. That's beautiful. That's better than, well, it's not better, but it's both, right? That it's responding to something inside of you, right? And that's what I invite and hope to have anyone's experience in listening to this Dharma talk, that something hits in there. I'd prefer if it was a positive, reverberating thing, and if it's not, then you push back. And as an aside, I mentioned I'm not a natural scholar for this stuff, and that's my own practice. What this talk has brought up in me, and from my own practice in general. What I've had the great good fortune to experience just this last season, I guess, was practicing with the Sangha and looking at Ben Connolly's Inside Vasubandhu's Yogacara, I think is the title, A Practitioner's Guide. And it's a pretty scholarly book, but something about Ben Connolly's approach, Zen practitioner, Zen teacher out of Minnesota, is eminently accessible for me because he focuses on a couple of things that are important to me: how to practice, and in a way it's a wide practice, but it's a very basic, for the well-being of everything. It can seem, well, it is what it is. I'll let you decide what you think of that. But for me, it fits my practice these days quite perfectly. Keeps me on the right path. And so I digress on that. But one of the things he talks about, working with a couple of things, these concepts. Like we take these concepts. So let's take the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We're taking the body, right? We're practicing being with the body. And then there's a whole list of practices that are in that. I'm not really going to get into that because this is a relatively short talk. And as my first one, I'm disorganized. But the point he was trying to make was, you take these ideas and they come up as concepts, and we have separations in Buddhism, and it's not, from my understanding, what he was trying to say was it's not exactly what we're describing as reality. What we're doing is offering you a way to efficiently practice, right? So when we practice with the body, and we think mindfulness of the body, in mindfulness of the body in the body. So that's just, I'm sitting here with my body. I was doing it just this morning. Okay, here we are, just sitting, like feeling from the inside out. As a matter of fact, it would be interoception. If you're familiar with these steps, interoception, feeling from the inside out. And then, feelings as feelings. Mind, consciousness as consciousness. Just like My other friends, my Theravada friends, talks about awareness. Awareness is this field. It's there before I showed up. I'm just like hopping on for the ride. There's actually, I'll talk a little bit about that maybe later, but mind objects. And as mind objects, and for me in my practice, what's that allowed me to do is just like organize things a little bit better in my experience. For me, body, feeling, mind, heart, all this is one big experience. And as a matter of fact, it helps to just tease those things apart. You're like, I'm sitting with my breath, mindfulness of breath, mindfulness, mindfulness of the breath, right? And then it's like, feeling starts to come in, like, some problem with my breath or something. And then I need to, wise discernment, maybe, would be the case. I need to be aware of the fact that, I'm actually not on my breath anymore. I'm feeling, or my mind is active. These words, again, the translations of the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta are kind of all over the place. Again, that was kind of confusing to me. For mind, they had consciousness. And I was like, well, would awareness work? So my confusion, I point that out as a path to study. Like, what does it mean to you? What are the four foundations to you? These are basically the ideas, but unless you're going to learn to speak Pāli, you're going to need a translation of it or create your own. And how do you create your own? How do you work with a discernment? Well, there is one way to develop discernment, in my opinion. And when cultivated and regularly practiced, it leads me to knowing what my body is telling me. And as you might have guessed, it is mindfulness centered on the body. This talk will be circular. There are themes involving cultivating and practicing. And as an aside, Roshi Tenshin from Yokoji, we were down there years ago, and he brought up the concept that we are all practicing something, always. We are all cultivating and regularly practicing. Behooves me to know what that is. Okay, so back to the nuts and bolts of the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the practices. Mindfulness of the breath, the breath in breathing. Mindfulness of the posture and movements, just in and of themselves. So without distraction, really, again, that's my practice. I was practicing that, I think, before I started practicing Buddhism. I think I started practicing yoga, and then I started practicing Tai Chi, and then I started practicing Qigong, and then Buddhism, and the stuff is kind of like, and these days, I practice humaning, because as a human, I'm just humaning, and I've got lots of different teachers and lots of different methodology that I use, but it's a really connecting perspective for me. Back to the importance of translating or finding a translation that rings true to you. Again, Ben Connolly talked about semantics, and there can be a lot of practice with semantics, and semantics can be good if it stimulates a good intention of perhaps finding what is so. I don't know how to, determining the truth. And the truth is, for each of us, maybe a little different, right? The truth for me is my path to awakening, I don't think really lies in extensive scholarly study. It feels right according to like listening to my body, which was, early in my Zen practice, Ryujin, our brother down in Los Angeles, he's, just that phrase, listen to your body. At the time I was like, it's very quiet. It doesn't say anything unless it says, I hurt here or there. And so I have cultivated and regularly practiced trying to listen. And the first time I was ever in this space was back in I guess maybe 2013 or 14 for a mindfulness-based stress reduction course. I heard her name escapes me, the teacher, a small group of us, and doing body scans. And how my body and mind were very disconnected at that point in time. And just, feeling your ankle as your ankle, feeling my thigh or my calf muscles as calf muscles, nothing. And then I had an experience of feeling my thighs, and it was a feeling of being in a cavern and hearing that big sound, like boom. Kind of like this place compared to Crow's End. You hit a bell here, it has a different sound. And it was my first glimpse of mindfulness of the body in the body, I think. Well, I'm sure I probably had other experiences, but obviously it was a pretty powerful one because I still remember it. And so those practices, perfect, as we are all, that's another thing that came up for me in this talk. We all have bodies. We may have judgments about our bodies. We have a lot of requirements of our bodies. There's 100 adjectives. One of the talks that I researched was one of my favorite teachers, Norman Fischer. What is your body? Right? This wonderful talk he gave, and he had just come off a week-long, if not a 2-week-long session, which if you haven't done sessions before, I highly recommend them. They give you a new perspective on practice. And it was a very interesting talk. What is your body? And I think at one point he's like, we don't know what our body is. And I agree with that. I don't really know what my body is. I know some things about it, but there's a lot that I don't know. Which brings me to, I think, the last modern teacher that I'll reference. So when I ran across that quote, was a fantastic quote, really got my attention. Then like I mentioned, I didn't trust it because it sounded too good, too understandable. And so then when I looked it up, it was part of a talk, or actually it was a paper written by Tara Brach. I know Toshin's one of his favorite teachers, I believe. And she couched that quote and cited where it was from. That's what led me to the Anguttara Nikāya Sutta. And her talk was about the experience of life living through you. And which really has been again, I remember talking to Conjo, let's see, we were on Mill Street, we were on Mill Street on a block down from Santa Rosa. I was standing in front, we were right with the lavender bushes, and talked to him about, it just feels like, kind of like life is happening, and it just kind of happens to be going through me right now, kind of thing, It's like my experience of being a human is a conduit. And that's a much more positive feeling than me trying to hold the world on my shoulders, hold this Dharma talk that is supposed to be perfect, right? This work I'm doing right here, it's got to convey exactly, I don't even know what it's supposed to. I mean, the perfection in my mind is some delusion. But that experience goes to the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta. In that first quote, it showed, it was framed in all these great things. Like, the Yogi's happy. This is sweet, wonderful. In the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, he's talking about you'll stop having to suffer like crazy. I can't remember the exact words, right? But it was a little different. Surmounting, purification, surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, the disappearance of pain and grief. That's why I'm here. Right? That's what I recognize. Like most humans, I've suffered. Some of it I've heaped on myself. Some of it has been circumstances, life being life. But what I have noticed is that in these practices, in practicing regularly, with a mindset of cultivation for the benefit of all, benefit of everything, which includes me, that seems to be helping. Right? That idea of life living through me, living through this body. So that literally says this body as the body is kind of like it's just, it resonates with things that it likes, just normal. I want to fend off, right? So I want to grasp, I want to practice aversion. It is very normal stuff, but in my experience, it's caused me a lot of suffering. So I want to practice more efficiently, more consistently, and continue. And let's see. So I think, hopefully I haven't gone too far. I didn't quite see what time we started. I think, yeah, we got a little bit more time. Let's see if I've touched on most of the things. Actually, that's what I did want to talk a little bit about. And really, when I listened to Joseph Goldstein talk about this sutra, and the actual phrases, foundations of mindfulness, and the translation, part of the translation, sati, it comes from the root word of to remember. So it's a remembering practice. Remembering. And then the foundations of mindfulness sounds like this thing I need to get a hold of and put in my back pocket. And that is not, it doesn't ring true to me. It's like a foundation I get, almost like a solid foundation I'm sitting on. It's not something I have, it's just this floating, moving thing that it's very important to come back to basics for me. And, but then the other definition or translation was abiding in mindfulness. That seems to work real well because it's mobile, it's floating, it's moving, it's able to respond. And so the other thing I was listening to the other day was a different idea of, again, down into the nitty-gritty of a practice of, this would have been the breath, right? So I don't think I mentioned, did I read? Breath, posture, and movements, reflection on anatomical parts or elements of the body. So that's just the body as the body. Those are the practices where you're practicing with the charnel ground, right? The body as a disgusting thing, bad smells, and I'm not going to show you my knee that's still on the mend, but a giant scab on my knee, right? It's a raspberry, unpleasant, but that's part of the body too. But it's that intimacy. Yeah, I would say that. So it's a kind-hearted curiosity and an intimacy that's centered on all these things. Okay, and abiding is probably a good word for in dealing with that, right? I use the more, for me, kind-hearted curiosity has worked. That's the translation I'm working with, like, what's my intention, you know? And that was the other thing is, my exposure to mindfulness was through John Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness-based stress reduction, where they emphasize the definition of mindfulness as a neutral position of like observing what's here right now, with neutrality. And it was one of the translations I looked at, and the translator saying, you know, that's not really what the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is talking about, because there is an agenda, and it's to awaken, and it's to awaken with everyone. So, matter of fact, the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta is within this larger framework of the 37. I don't know. Again, back to the Pāli Canon, as it was looking at it, and I didn't write it down because it was like I don't really know this to talk about it, but it's the 37 like components, or I can't remember the word they used. I saw 7 of awakening. So if you want to awaken, there's a plan for you. I advise you to look into Pāli Canon and Theravada Buddhism, and they'll set you up. And let's see. Okay. So attention. Okay. The other thing that I would point out was that I mentioned interoception. And with interoception comes exteroception. Exteroception. So just the things that are coming in. It's like I feel what's inside my body, and I'm distinguishing that between what's coming to my body. And then the other one that's important, has been important for me in my practice, is proprioception. My body in space. Where is it? And it's, for me, it's almost even hard to explain, but it's of almost paramount importance. That has to do with those 3 things of safety, connection, and social standing, or whatever that is, because literally I need to get my bearings. I know it when I was at one of the Dharma combats in Los Angeles. It's like, standing up to ask my question, I thought, okay, I'm going to actually stand up and I got to get my bearings. Where am I? As a matter of fact, I've talked with other people, and my spiritual condition, right, is how do I know how I'm doing? It's kind of like echolocation. I gotta refer to my surroundings, my loved ones, my enemies. I gotta get my bearings. And so all these things are right in there with mindfulness centered on the body, right? Cultivated and regularly practiced. And any practice, this is what I learned from my Qigong and Tai Chi practices, a little bit often. Thinking of these practices, doing what I can, that really seems to work for me. So, all the key points in Buddhism, so kind of as conclusion to wrap up, working with the body, being aware of the body as you progress in this, as I've progressed in this. The key points in Buddhism are impermanence, suffering, non-self, right? All those things are there to be had in simple practice. And so, with that, I will finish with a poem that was in Tara Brach's paper. And it's a poem by Ken Keyes, and it's titled, Hokusai Says, It matters that you care. It matters that you feel. It matters that you notice. It matters that life lives through you. Look, feel, let life take you by the hand. Let life live through you.
can open it up for questions, comments, and then you'll close that up when we're doing the vows.
Okay. So, I open it up for questions and comments too. If any of these things sound true, any of these things sound debatable, or just questions in general.
I didn't find anything in there I'm ready to debate yet, but I'll keep thinking on it. But I was curious, what are mind objects?
Mind objects?
Yeah. What's that
In my
referring to?
practice, that I go back to a phrase that I heard from Rinkai early on, mental constructs from my practice. Now again, this is where in a way I'm on shaky ground explaining the Pāli Canon, right? But I take that as my practice, absolutely. That is a mind object that, boy, I can reach out, touch it, like even an opinion. Like some opinions I got, you could hit it with a stick and it would ring out. That is an object. But if I just take a step back, perhaps a backward step, and look at it, yeah, is it true? Is it real? I mean, not really. I mean, it's a thing, kind of, but it's really amorphous. So seeing mind objects as mind objects doesn't have me believing my own stories. And at the risk of being vulgar, if I'm buying my own bullshit, I'm headed for trouble. Right? So, again, that's a really good question, and one I've had. I was like writing, my wife helped me print some of these things out, as well as technical difficulties between me and computers and mice and such. And she's like, mental objects, because we changed it, because the translations are all weird. So mental objects, what's a mental object? She asked the same question. And I was like, no, I prefer mind objects. And then she was still like, yeah, whatever. Fair enough, too. I mean, so, yeah. Now you can debate when you go check on veracity of that. But that's what I think it is. And if you don't have questions, I also invite your definitions of this practice. Because I have a feeling we all practice this, whether we kind of know it or not, practicing with the body. Although, again, my wife, my teacher, said, people don't want to do that, really, being mindful of the body. And I kind of recognize that. There was a long time where I just did, my body was along for the ride. My mind was in charge of the ship, and I paid the price for it. Eventually, my body was like, we're going to go different ways, I think.
Okay. I felt like your talk was very cohesive and scholarly. I mean, approached the idea of body, mind, concept from different perspectives, and I think that's important for scholarly work. And what comes up for me when I'm hearing a lot of this stuff is that when I just practice impermanence and letting go of my thoughts and getting back into my body sensations and following my breath, that my intuition pops up. It's just like a Ouija board.
I like it.
My answers come, and the minute I try to control that system, they just disappear. And one of the things I've been asking myself lately is, why am I so fixated on looking at people's beautiful homes around here on my dog walks? Why is it, and it's always been like that. Even as a little child pushing my doll carriage, I was really fascinated by people's houses and really coveting them and envying them and all that stuff. And it really, I can see how it's all around safety. That the big beautiful house is going to protect me. Yeah. So that was a little gem that I can put behind me now. So thank you.
Well, I love that. And that the Buddha talked about in the Satipaṭṭhāna all these things, right? The end of lamentation and sorrow, all those things. When those are, in my experience, when those things are lifted, there's a further liberation, and it's the liberation of the wisdom of the body. The body's way smarter than me. Polyvagal theory I mentioned talks about, who's running the ship. 80% is coming from the body, 20% is coming from the brain. I'd say, I'm not the math whiz, but it seems like clear who's in charge. But, if it's just been locked down and not listened to, things arise.
Kōshen, thank you for your talk. And actually, you were just touching on the thing that I wanted to ask you to say something more about, which is listening to your body. And how you mentioned that you started with yoga and then Tai Chi and Qigong, and that preceded your practice of Zen and Buddhism generally. And so my question is, how do you think that having those practices both before and continuing those practices during your Zen practice has sort of informed things or made a difference for you?
How have they? Well, first, they have influenced it greatly, and then in more concrete terms, one of the first things I found when, for my yoga practice, I didn't really take to it. It was a good thing to do. I was talking to my friends who said, I'm sore all over pretty much. Like, you could start down at the toes and go up, and you're like, oh yeah, that hurts. Like, oh, you should do yoga. So I started doing yoga with people. What I found was that I could be okay with discomfort. Getting into a posture was challenging and breathing into it. It's like, getting comfortable being uncomfortable per se. And my yoga teacher, a fantastic guy, Yogi Tony, talked about, doing a daily practice. Again, cultivating and regularly practicing a yoga practice. It's like, you don't have to, how long do you hold the pose? You hold it until your breath comes. His was, as I recall, hold it until your breath relaxes. There you go. Good. So that's what yoga practice, and then Tai Chi, when I, was eminently affordable through the adult school, the San Luis Coastal Unified School District. That was something that just got me, right? It got my attention. I was ardent and enthusiastic about Tai Chi as a movement. Why? Because it is a whole body experience, there are various reasons, but really, when I look on it, that proprioception, to be in the world. I close my eyes, I have this body in this space. Body doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it's, those of you familiar with me, I go to the phrase, how to proceed. How do I proceed? And Tai Chi is like, oh, you want to be a human with a body, and you want to proceed? Here, try this. You do this regularly, you cultivate a regular practice, and you move through space. And so that's huge. And then even addressing another aspect of my body, my experience as a human, I had cultivated and regularly practiced an unsustainable internal idle speed is what I came to conclude at work, primarily in my work. Do a gardening business, and born and raised or grew up was like, yeah, this isn't Caltrans. We don't like sit around leaning on our shovel. My apologies to Caltrans workers, but that was the image we had. We were just joking, but that was it, and doing, what I do for a living, I try to work quickly. It's just what it is. As I've aged, it has become more and more apparent that there is incoherence in the psycho-physiological state, right? Back to that one thing. Fancy words, right? But my body, heart, mind are not on the same page. That's another part of my practice. Tai Chi offered me a way to physically represent this smooth up and down, the yin yang symbol. It's this circle, opposite colors, but my teacher, my original teacher, really stressed it's a spiral, and you're going places, right? It seems like a circle, but it's a spiral, and that image, wonderful. And so that was a long answer. We'll stop now. Could go on.
That was a great answer. Thank you.
How's our time? Oh.
Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable Buddha way, I vow to embody it. Numberless beings, I vow to serve them. Inexhaustible delusions, I vow to end them. Boundless dharmas, I vow to practice them. Unsurpassable